stress, burnout, and languishing. What? What the heck is languishing? Well, these are three emotional states that most nurses know all too well. In this video, we're going to be breaking it all down, what each one of these emotional states actually looks like, how to tell the difference, and then of course, more importantly, what to do if you happen to be stuck in one of them. And then make sure that you stick around to the end because I've got a quick self-assessment that you can do to figure out where you're at right now. Plus, of course, some practical strategies to help you shift into a better state, no matter where you're starting from. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Katie Stevens, RN, founder of Katie Stevens Consulting, and I've been a nurse for over 20 years, and I've served in many different roles during that time, everything from the bedside to the executive suite. And I'll be honest with you today, I have definitely dealt with my fair share of stress and languishing throughout my career, but the burnout that I experienced a few years ago, that one really took me for a loop, really hit me hard. And looking back, I don't think I really fully respected what I was walking through at that time. And I think I really didn't recognize the signs, or, maybe I did and I just pushed through them and I didn't want to admit it. But either way, it really cost me and I got a wake-up call. And that's exactly why I'm making this video, not to lecture to anyone, but to really just share my experience and to hopefully bring some awareness to something that I wish that I would have paid more attention to myself at that time. So let's start off by talking about stress. We often treat stress like it's the enemy, but it's not always bad. In fact, it can be really, really good under the right circumstances. So there's the kind of stress that actually helps us grow. It shows up in challenge, during learning, and in momentum. It really helps us sharpen our thinking. It pushes you outside of your comfort zone. So I like to think of this like working out. When you work out, when you go to the gym, you intentionally, put your body under stress. You lift heavier, you run faster or farther, and all of that pressure, all of that strain causes your muscles to grow. But what I will tell you is that if you go too hard, if you go too often, or if you don't get enough rest, you can overtrain, you can get injured, and you can start to break down. Stress works basically the exact same way. Stress needs to be cyclical, just like the working out example that we used. So there is a cycle of challenge, recovery, and growth. And without that recovery, that's when it turns toxic. And that's when we can start to slide into burnout. Now, sometimes though, what I will tell you is that it's not actually a crash. It's just a slow fade. You start to, maybe disconnect or drift. And that's what we would call languishing. So it may not feel as intense as burnout, but it can be just as serious because it can last longer and it can also go unnoticed. So let's actually just define exactly what we're talking about here, because clarity really is power. So first off, let's define stress. So stress is your body's natural response to pressure. It is designed to be temporary. And when it comes and goes in cycles, under that cycle that we talked about earlier, challenge, recovery, and growth, it is actually very healthy. But when stress becomes chronic, when you're constantly under pressure with no break or no recovery, that's when it can begin to really erode your physical and your emotional health. Now, burnout is what happens when you've stayed in chronic stress for far too long. It's not just fatigue. It's really emotional depletion. It is detachment. It is waking up and thinking, what's the point? You might feel numb, cynical, or like the work that you used to care about really no longer matters. And what I want to share with you is that this is not weakness. This is truly a state of collapse, and it really does require attention. There are real physiological, psychological, and neurological things going on in your body at this time. And there is real science behind why burnout hits so hard and why it's not something that you can or should just push through. It's really not something that you can hustle your way out of, because if I could have done it, I would have. It's really your body and your brain needing healing at this stage. Now, languishing, on the other hand, is different, and we hinted at this a little bit earlier, but it is subtle, and it doesn't necessarily feel like a complete breakdown. It is basically just a slow fade. You're not necessarily in crisis, you're still functioning, you're still showing up, but that spark is gone. You just feel flat, like meh, disconnected, unmotivated. And languishing may not feel as serious as burnout, but I will tell you that it can be because, you can sit in this languishing zone for months, even years without realizing it, what's happening underneath the surface. And if you ignore it for too long and you just keep grinding while you're feeling disconnected and emotionally flat, it can then become burnout. So now that we've defined what each one of these emotional states looks like, what do we do with all of that? So let's take a quick moment to just pause and reflect. We're going to do a quick check-in. I'm going to walk you through some questions. It's a self-assessment. So I'll read off a few statements and I want you to just take a deep breath, be honest, listen to what resonates and what comes up. There's, no judgment, no pressure, just a moment of reflection and awareness here. Okay, let's start the check-in. Deep breath, be honest. What sounds most like you right now? I am tired, but I still care. I still feel engaged. I feel stretched, but I've still got some fire in me. What about I'm functioning, but I do feel disconnected. I feel numb, kind of flat. I'm doing all of the things that I'm supposed to do, but the joy is just gone. Or what about I'm exhausted, I'm detached, I feel like I'm disappearing, and I just don't know if I can keep doing this. So based on these three statements, which one resonated with you today? Where are you at? Again, there's no judgment here. You don't need to explain it. Awareness is just the first step. So what do you do with this now that you're aware? Well, if you showed up in the green zone, you're likely in a period of stress. So in this situation, protect your time off like your life depends on it. Move your body, you can pray, breathe, really make sure that you are recovering on purpose. Stress really needs scheduled rest time. So make sure that you really build that into your day or into your week. So if you happen to show up in the yellow zone, you might be languishing. So in this zone, what you're going to want to do is really reignite your joy. So go on a walk, turn on some music, laugh with someone. You really need some spark. So reconnect with your why. Reflect on, some of those moments that have made it all worth it, whether that's in your job or your family life or, any kind of relationship you're in. So the other thing you can do is really try to find some flow. So engage in something that really pulls in your full attention. So, that can be creativity, again, prayer, a side project, or a really fun hobby. So those are some really great things to engage in when you might be finding yourself in that yellow zone or the languishing. Now, what if you found yourself in the red zone, in that burnout stage? Again, no judgment here. What I'll say is stop minimizing. You do need real support. So seek out support from your provider or a mental health professional. Your organization may have EAP programs that are really designed to support people in this time. You can consider therapy. The one thing you can definitely do is ask for time off and really take it. The other thing to do is to say no and to start delegating and to make some real changes in your life that serve your healing. The bottom line is stop minimizing. You need real support and take it seriously. Now, if you want to go deeper, I've brought out a few resources that I'm going to share that have been really meaningful to me in my own recovery and my own reflection process. So anything by Dr. Caroline Leaf, I have really loved. I have read almost all of her books at least once, some of them multiple times. So one of them here is The Perfect You that I've read a few different times, definitely different parts of it multiple times. Switch on Your Brain is excellent. And then also she has a newer book called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. And she is a neuroscientist, so everything she does is rooted in science, which I love. And I think that these are especially powerful if you're really trying to renew your mind and build new positive patterns in your life and really build some resilience. So anything by Dr. Caroline Leaf, I have personally really loved. The other author that I really reach for a lot is anything by Michael Hyatt. One of the books that I found particularly helpful during this time was a book called Living Forward. And it's a really powerful guide for helping you to realign your life with what really matters most, especially I think if you're in that burnout stage or if you're really feeling stuck. He's also authored a book called Mind Your Mindset, which I have not read yet. It's on my list. But this might be another good one for some mental clarity and intentionality during this time. Now, I also love anything by Patrick Lencioni. His book, The 6 Types of Working Genius, I think is an especially helpful one that you might reach for if you're in that languishing stage. And then another one that I actually have not read yet, but it comes highly recommended and reviewed, is Sacred Rest. It's by Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith. And she really introduces this idea of there's 7 different types of rest. And this one, again, is on my list. And I think it would be a really great resource if you're feeling, depleted and you can't understand why traditional rest isn't really helping. So all of those resources might be really helpful for you depending on where you're at today. Now, if you want to understand why so many of us are stuck in these emotional states, and why really wellness can no longer be treated as optional if you're a nurse, check out our video, Why Addressing Wellness is No Longer Optional for Nurses. It is a deep dive into the systemic and cultural pressures that are really impacting our profession, and I think it will give you some language and perspective around these topics.